Welcome everybody. In this video, we're going to solve absolute value equations. So as a quick reminder before we start, remember the absolute value of a number is its distance to zero. So for instance, the absolute value of positive 5 is 5, because if you count from 5 to 0, there's 5 spaces there. And the absolute value of negative 5 is also 5, because again, if you count from negative 5 to 0, there are 5 spaces. So notice here, and this is actually really important, that there are two different inputs that give you the same output, right? So to get the answer of 5, we could have used positive 5 or negative 5. And that idea helps us when we solve equations. So how do you solve absolute value equations? The first thing you're going to do is make sure the absolute value is isolated, meaning it's by itself on one side of the equation. And when you do that, the other side should either be positive or 0. And then the reason is because the absolute value of a number is never going to be negative. So your absolute value should be equal to a positive number, or if not, 0 is fine as well. And then what we do is we split the problem into two pieces in order to get the two different results that would work. So one of them you set equal to whatever the number is on the right-hand side, and the other one you set equal to the negative version. And then those are the two equations that you solve. So in most cases for absolute values, again, not every case, but in most cases, you do get two solutions. So just doing a really simple one first. Let's solve the absolute value of Q equals 6. Now, the absolute value is by itself. The right side is not negative, so that's good. It needs to be either 0 or positive, so this is fine. And then what you're going to do here is you're going to split whatever's on the inside. You rewrite it, and then one side stays 6 and the other side stays the opposite. Now here we're actually done. There's nothing to solve, right? But these would be your two solutions, and they do both work, right? The absolute value of 6 is 6, and the absolute value of negative 6 is also 6. So let's solve I don't know, more of a real problem now. So solve the absolute value of 5w plus 3 is equal to 7. Notice that the absolute value is already isolated, meaning that it's by itself on one side of the problem, and the other value is either positive or 0. So again, no absolute value is equal to negative numbers. It can't happen. So this is good. So what we do is we split this into two problems. So I take the 5w plus 3, I set it equal to 7, and then I also take the 5w plus 3, and I set it equal to negative 7. And now I'm going to solve. So here I would subtract 3 from both sides. I get 5w is equal to 4. I divide by 5. So my first answer is 4/5. Here I subtract 3 from both sides. I get negative 10. Divide by 5, and I get w equals negative 2. And that's it. We're done. Now you can check this. So I'm not going to check all of them, but I do want you to see one of them so you can see what happens. So let me I'll start with the 4/5 first. So when you're checking, you go right back to the original problem and you plug in your answer and you simplify. So you're not resolving this. You're just going to plug in and simplify. So here, 5 and 5 cancels. So I have absolute value of 4 plus 3. Well, 4 plus 3 is 7. So this first one makes sense, right? The absolute value of 7 is 7. And when I check negative 2, I have the absolute value of 5 times negative 2 plus 3 equals 7. Just going right back to the original and plugging in my answer. Let's see, I have negative 10 plus 3 is equal to 7. And then negative 10 plus 3 is negative 7. And when you take the absolute value of that, you do also get 7. So by splitting, we're able to solve and get both answers that would give us 7 on the other side. So here you have two solutions. All right, so here's another example. And this time the absolute value is not by itself. So you do want to begin by getting it alone. So I'm going to take that 5 and bring it to the other side. I'm going to subtract 5 to both sides. So now I have absolute value of 2x is equal to 2. Now it's by itself. So now you are going to just evaluate. Notice how the right side is 0 or positive. So again, you don't have to worry about that until the absolute value is isolated. So if you see negatives in the beginning, it's not a big deal until your absolute value is by itself. Then you want to make sure the right side is actually not negative. At this point, we're going to split. So 2x is equal to 2, and 2x is equal to negative 2. You cannot split early or you'll get the wrong answer. So you do need to isolate that absolute value first. Divide both sides by 2 and I get 1. Here I get negative 1. Now I'll let you check your answer on your own at home, but if you plug in either of these solutions, they both will work. All right. What if you have an absolute value equal to 0? Again, notice the absolute value is already isolated here. The right side is 0, which is fine. In that case, you can't split because there's no positive or negative 0. 0 is actually neither positive nor negative. So if you have something equal to 0, then you just solve it one time. So this will be your exception where you typically only get one answer instead of 2. And then if you plug in negative 4, you'll end up with absolute value of 0 equals 0, which is correct. All right, I'm going to do one more of this, one more here. Okay. Now here my absolute value is not isolated. So before I do anything, I'm going to get it by itself. I start by bringing the 25 to the other side. So we typically still do, you're adding and subtracting, before you do anything else. So I have a negative 2 there. Now I do have a 2 being multiplied by the absolute value. So I am going to divide that out. So I have absolute value equals negative 1. All right, now I see a problem. I see my absolute value is by itself, which is great, but it's equal to a negative, and there's no way that this can happen. The answers for absolute value are either 0 or positive. So this would be a no solution. So you can write it like that. We can use the empty set. We could use the null set. Again, there's different ways to express that answer, but basically nothing is going to work here. So sometimes you may have to isolate first. And again, you want to be careful because if you look at it initially, it looks like it works out fine, right? Everything is positive. It seems okay. But once we isolate that absolute value, we see pretty quickly that actually it's not going to have an answer. All right, I'm going to do a couple more examples for you, and I'm going to mix it up a little bit. So in the next two cases, you're going to have two absolute values. Oops. All right, that's a nice absolute value line. Sorry about the curve there. So here you have an absolute value equal to an absolute value. So this is actually how you want to be set up if you have two absolute values. We are going to separate them. So try to isolate each one. And now what you're going to do is the following. So you're still going to split. There's actually not much difference, even though it looks more complicated. So I usually let my left side be kind of my main focus. So I'm going to split into 3x plus 2 equals the right side. 5x minus 8. So just pretend like there's no absolute values there at all. And then the way that I do it is I rewrite the 3x plus 2 again. And normally we make the other side negative, right? So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to make it negative, but I have to make the whole expression negative because it's not just a single value. So the left side stays fixed, just like it always has. And the right side, you do one regular and one negative version. And now you can go ahead and solve. So here, I'm going to subtract the 3x to both sides. I'm going to add 8. And then I'm going to divide by 2. And I have x equals 5 for my first answer. On the left here, you do need to distribute that negative. So it's negative 5x plus 8. I'm actually going to add the 5x to both sides here. I tend to like my x's to be positive when I can. I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. So I have 8x equals 6 and divide by 8. Now I can simplify this. 6 and 8 are both divisible by 2. So this can become 3/4 as my other solution here. And then that would be correct. So here are my two answers. You can also write any of these answers in a set format. So you could also write it as, 3/4 comma 5 as your solution set. So different ways to write our final answers, but basically 5 and 3/4 are the two answers. I'll let you check these at home. So if you plug in 5, you should get a true statement. And if you plug in 3/4, you should also get a true statement. All right, there we go. All right, let's do one more. Oops. Hang on, I'm writing the wrong one down. Let's try this again. Okay. Sorry, easier to rewrite than try to cross it out. So here's the example I wanted to do. Again, two absolute values, so you can see one on each side, which is how you would want to start these. And you let at least for me, I let my left side sort of be my anchor. So my first one is going to be x minus 3, and then I leave the right side the same. And then I'm going to do the x minus 3 again, but with the negative on the other side. Okay, so I'm going to solve these individually. On the left side, I would add x to both sides. I'm doing the math in my head here. So I get 2x minus 3 equals 5. Then I add 3 to both sides. 2x equals 8 and divide by 2. So I have my first solution of 4. On the right side, make sure you go ahead and distribute. So I have a negative 5 plus x. I'm going to get my x's together. So I subtract the x from both sides. But what happens is it cancels on both sides. And we've seen this before, right, when our variables cancel. So now let's look at what I have left. I have negative 3 equals negative 5, and that doesn't make sense. That's not true. This is false. So the equation over here actually has no solution. So this is kind of a rarer one as well, where we just have one answer here. Most times with absolute value equations, you'll see that you end up with two answers. Occasionally, you may end up with only one answer, or sometimes with no answers if they don't work out. But you just want to take each piece one at a time. Again, let that one side kind of be your anchor, and then you're taking the plus and minus of the other side. If your absolute value was on the right side instead of the left side, you could just rewrite the equation too. So if you find it easier, I tend to like my absolute values on the left. It really doesn't matter, though, it's the same process. So you want to isolate that absolute value. Or if you have two, you have one on each side, and then take it from there.